Well, thank you, Patsy, and first of all, thank everyone for being here with us this weekend. We've only just begun to have folks in person rather than on Zoom, and I must admit at first it was a little bit much to get used to once again, being physically one-on-one or in bigger groups with individuals, but we're now in shape and enjoying it very, very much, so we really do appreciate you all coming back, connecting with one another, but also most importantly for us, connecting with the university. So time is limited, and of course I could probably stand up here and as an academic put anything into a 50-minute lecture, but today I have less time, and so I'm going to try to just get to some highlights for the year and then leave some time for questions, both from you here and also from folks who are watching via Zoom. First of all, for those of you, some of you might have been here for commencement 2 weeks ago. We had an unusual year, as of course everything is quite unusual following the past 2 years. We had 2 commencements in one day. We actually had 3 commencements in 3 days. We had a celebration traditionally at 10:30 on Sunday for the class of 22, which was really terrific. Governor Deval Patrick gave a stirring commencement address. And then later in the afternoon at 5 o'clock, we did it all again for the classes of 20 and 21, and much to our surprise, so many of those now alumni came back for the celebration, and it was terrific. And Marta Kaufman from the class of 78 gave that commencement address, and interestingly, she and Deval gave similar messages, but in very different ways. Deval being the politician he was, Marta being the Hollywood creative figure that she was, gave very different ways to say the same thing and to encourage our students to be citizens and really to participate in our democratic process. As I said, different ways, but the same message. Prior to that, 2 days or 3 days earlier, we had to have a third commencement because our Frisbee team made the Nationals, and their game was going to be played on the weekend. And so we had a small celebration in Hassenfeld Conference Center that was really unique in some ways and very, very enjoyable. But in any case, those 3 commencement ceremonies were terrific, and it was a great graduating class. I should say a little bit, not in my notes right here, but about admissions. We were hoping to admit a class of 920 thereabouts, which is quite large, but we were making up a little bit for the past 2 years and the unknowns of COVID, and we had an extraordinary yield, much beyond what we expected. So we're hovering about, maybe another 160 or 170 students above that. We're encouraging many to take gap years. About 60 or 70 students take gap years traditionally. We're hoping 170 or 180 students take gap years. We don't think that's going to happen, but in any case, we're preparing for a largest class in Brandeis history. In some ways, I'd rather have that problem than 172 fewer students coming. All right, so highlights for the past year, and then of course I want you folks to ask questions on things that perhaps I do not get to today. First of all, we have to start with the pandemic, of course, because it was such a important factor over the course of the last 2 years. And I should start by saying a big thank you to all the alums for the support that alumni gave to the institution. As soon as we pivoted in March of 2020 and announced that we were going to do hybrid learning or learning from home and Zoom, we had remarkable support. Our emergency fund garnered more support than we ever anticipated, and it really did help students in many ways and help families in many ways. Students had to get home, students had to find ways to get home. Many of them didn't have ways to connect to university, believe it or not. Some of them were living in shared rooms with shared siblings, and they had 3, 4, or 5 doing school at the same time, had one computer. So we did a whole bunch of stuff with the alumni support to help those students get online and continue their education. Alumni also helped in many ways during that time, finding opportunities for students in the summer through internships, mentored students. There were a lot of online hybrid internships going on even during the height of the pandemic before the vaccines came, and alumni really stepped forward to help with our students as well. I should say also the presidents of universities, especially those of us in Massachusetts, began something very different. I was president before for 11 years at Middlebury College, very close to the NESCAC group of presidents, the other small liberal arts institutions in the Northeast. And we were very close friends with one another. But even during the financial meltdown in 2008-9, none of us ever acknowledged that there was anything wrong when we met 4 times a year. You would think that nothing was going on in the world. It's a tradition for college and university presidents never to show any weakness in their institution. COVID caused very different response. In fact, we began meeting weekly on a Zoom at 11 o'clock on Friday, and we did that for a year and a half until we then went to once every other week. talking about COVID. We had 4 members of our group of 55 presidents who sat on the Governor's Council on COVID, who gave advice to the governor, tried to get lobbying for universities in terms of what we needed most. And it created an esprit de corps that I never saw among college and university presidents. It was quite remarkable. You had all the research ones in the Boston area, like MIT, Harvard, BU, Tufts, and Brandeis, working with tiny little liberal arts colleges that I never heard of in the Berkshire Mountains out in Western Mass. And it was really amazing how everyone stepped up to help one another. So there was some good that came out of the pandemic, but of course there were great challenges as well. I'll also say one other thing about the pandemic over the last year is that, like today, we're able to offer alumni so many more events on the platforms doing hybrid programming, and enabled us to reach out to so many of you in ways that we couldn't do before. I mean, I found it, I started getting too comfortable with Zoom, having many Zooms with groups 12 hours apart in Asia, down in Latin America, and so forth. In a way, I'm going to miss that, so I hope that we could continue that, and people will be as excited to see us through Zoom as they were during those 2 years. We can come back to any questions you might have on the pandemic and its impact on the university. I will say that we lost about $36 million in revenue in the first year of the pandemic. We still balanced our budget because we were able to, of course, freeze compensation and also halt the matching benefit from the university. We also froze budgets. Senior administrators took, of course, salary cuts. We balanced the budget. We were able to do that for a year. We were able to do it for a second year, but of course, it's now starting to sort of feel the pains. We can't continue to do that and still maintain an excellent program. So we can talk about that a little bit when we get to the Q&A. Let me talk a little bit about priorities for this year. There were many moments of pride in the past year, and I'm sure many of you have followed some of the news. We had alumni taking part in, for example, medical discoveries having to do with COVID, as you know. Drew Weissman, of course, has been recognized many times over for his work on the vaccine. We have many educators. I mean, the number of educators who have participated as teachers, and teachers were on the front line, many of them. They had to basically learn how to teach anew, doing through Zoom and hybrid from K through 12 and even college at the higher levels. And Brandeis has a huge number of those alums doing that as well. So in the course of the next year, what we're doing now is that alumni have stepped forward. What we're most prideful about is the support, as I mentioned before, that alums have given the university, and it showed up in our fundraising. For those of you who don't know the nuances of fundraising, I think the last 2 years might have been the first 2 years when all across the board for Brandeis fundraising, alums took the lead. We used to have, we still do, have an amazing support from friends of the university. In fact, I joke that most college university presidents would kill for the friends that Brandeis has and the support they give to the university. But in the last 2 years, alums have stepped up to be the leading givers to the institution. And much of that has to do with the academic experience. I've spoken many times about how, if you look through the decades, from the 50s all the way through the 2000 teens, you find in all of our surveys and all of our conversations, alums give the university an A+, A, or A- more than 80% of the time for their academic experience at the university. Where we do less good, and we're working on this as part of our framework for the future, is in the student life side. What is social life like? Now, when I talk to the older alums, the more senior alums, excuse me, I do hear that it was a great time and that everyone loved their social life and so forth. But I think starting in the 80s and 90s, the expectations of what social life was and is, and also some of the changing legal aspects like the drinking age, sort of changed the environments on campus. And since then, we've had some challenges in terms of meeting the social life needs of students. We're working on that. The framework for the future had 8 task forces, specifically in social life, trying to find out from recent alums and also current students how we could do better. And we're hoping now that the COVID has passed, we can sort of get to work in those areas. But in terms of fundraising, the appreciation for the faculty continues. I mean, this is what the alums speak most about, is the appreciation for the faculty that they had, be it in the 1950s or be it in the 2000 teens. This is what alumni talk about. And I'm happy to say that this past year we had an unprecedented 5 new endowed professorships given by alumni, which is pretty astounding. 5 in 1 year. In fact, 5 endowed professorships given over the course of 5 months, which I think is quite remarkable. They were given the first ever in African and African American studies. That will be announced fairly soon. This was a terrific gift. We have a department that started in 1969, and we've been trying to have an endowed professorship there for that long a time, and we finally got one. We're very grateful for that gift. We have another one in Israeli society and politics. That one sounds like maybe run-of-the-mill, but in this political day and age, it isn't quite run-of-the-mill. It's quite challenging. And to make it even more interesting, it was not given to the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies, but it was given as a result of a relationship with the Crown Center for Middle East Studies. And for those of you who might, think things through, you have the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies, and then you have the Crown Center for Middle East Studies, and the two don't necessarily do things together all the time, although that's changing a little bit. But the benefactor here, the donor, wanted to make sure that Israel was considered within the Middle East when they had all research and activities going on about the Middle East, that it's hard to think about the Middle East without Israel, especially now in today's Middle East politics. So in any case, we're very happy about that chair as well. One in mathematics from an alumna, another one in finance, and then finally a fifth one in Jewish studies. And the interesting thing that Hannah Peters pointed out was 4 of these were given singularly by a woman, and the fifth one by a couple, which is quite remarkable to see women in such a philanthropic spot in higher education. It's highly unusual, and I think it speaks very highly of Brandeis and also speaks to one of our great strengths. Direct support for students still remains our highest priority for all of our fundraising, and scholarships is most important, as many of you probably know. There are 3 areas of a university that we seek funding for, no matter whether we're in a campaign or not in a campaign. One of them is student support in the form of scholarships and fellowships. Another one is faculty support in the form of endowed professorships. And a third one would be in the form of physical facilities, which is not a hot ticket item with many Brandeis alums. They prefer the first 2, and we've done better in that area. One of the interesting support gifts that we got this year was a new peace scholarship program for refugees refugees fleeing the Ukraine and other war-torn countries. This was headed by Alan Hassenfeld, who's co-chair of the board at the business school, and he was joined by Barbara Clark to lead a $500,000 challenge. And I think we're up to about $750,000 or $800,000 for $1 million challenge there for that scholarship. The idea is to give opportunity to refugees fleeing Ukraine right now, but other countries as well, and we hope to complete that scholarship sometime this year. We're also seeking support for students on internships. I think, as I said in almost every one of my big gatherings that we have with alums, internships, actually since 2007-8, have become the coin of the realm for students today in undergraduate education. And much of that is because since 2007-8, with the Great Recession, a lot of businesses, and you probably know this very well, have more or less gotten rid of their human resources departments and really have relied upon internships to really test the waters for new incoming employees. And so internships are so critical now for students. When students come to look at universities, one of the first things that parents ask me is, what is your internship program like? What is the percentage of students who get internships and so forth, for good reason. So thanks to all of you who have contributed in that area, and we're going to continue, of course, to do that as well. So Rise Together Mentoring Program is another new program that we had that is really a collaboration between the Hyatt Career Center and also Student Affairs. And then we also had this wonderful $10 million gift from the Samuels family in Houston called Compact, which is really the Center for Community Partnerships and Civic Transformation. The goal here really is to build upon a great strength of Brandeis students over the years. When many of you were here, you probably participated or had a roommate or friend who participated in the Waltham group. This is our largest student organization, does outreach in the local community. Bobby Samuels and her family, in honor of her husband Vic, who passed away last year, both from the class of '63, gave a $10 million gift to ensure and to really advance what we do in this area of civic engagement. And it's a wonderful gift, and it's so Brandeis, and we're so grateful for it. So among our priorities for the year, as noted in the framework for the future, our focus is on science, at least in the next 5 years or so. It started with a beautiful endowed professorship given last year by another Houston alum, Albert Chow, who gave a $5 million professorship in neuroscience, and that really got us going. We're adding more faculty positions in the sciences. We're giving augmented research opportunities for undergraduate students. And we also passed last year a very Brandesian engineering science program that's really the ability to offer something in engineering has almost become as important to offer internship opportunities. When we look at the reasons for why Brandeis students choose not to come to Brandeis, but rather go to Tufts or go to Northeastern or go to other schools in the Boston area, it's because we lack an engineering program. This has become so important for universities these days. Our faculty should be commended on this. They worked 10 years to get this program approved within themselves. We have these archaic processes that you can imagine. It took 10 years from the first time that it was proposed, but the two faculty members who led the charge from physics and from biology made proposals across campus. They had 42 different meetings with different constituent groups to show that this engineering science program was not only going to be interdisciplinary, but also interdivisional and interschool. So the idea behind this is not to create a separate department or a separate school of engineering, but rather to have an interdepartmental program that lies upon 7 or 8 departments, mostly in the sciences, but then engages other departments across the university. So you'll have creative arts in there, you'll have the Heller School of Social Policy in there, you'll have the business school in there, and they'll all have parts to play in this area known as engineering. It used to be that engineering was quite rigid and focused. Now, of course, it spans issues like ethics, it spans issues like artificial intelligence and how you do that. It involves artistic creation in terms of design. So it looks like a great program. I was just talking to a gentleman who teaches at Princeton in the engineering school at Princeton, and we were talking about what the needs would be for this program. So we have a lot of faculty in the sciences already committed to participating. We'll probably need 6 to 8 new positions over time to make this program work, and we're off and running on trying to fundraise for it. Another priority for the year has been one of my really strong preferences, which is to talk about the university's Jewish identity. And I came into this position in 2016 recognizing that this was one of the great challenges for Brandeis, to be able to articulate who it was now in the 21st century as opposed to who it was in 1948 when it was founded. Times have changed. Situations have changed, but the university has more or less been a little bit slow on the take in terms of talking about what it means to be a Jewish-founded institution in 2016 or now in 2022. So I launched these discussions on campus with bated breath because this is a very challenging and difficult topic. In fact, the first email I got back in response to the announcement that I was going to host these different discussions was from a faculty member who was here for 51 years and still teaching. And he wrote and he said that I'm the first president to sort of take this head on and that it was very brave. And I felt compelled to write back to this individual immediately, which I did, in saying, first of all, being the first isn't always best, but I'll take it. And on the second issue, it's not brave at all. In fact, I just think it's important and it's in fact necessary for the institution to be able to stake out who it is and what it means to be Jewish founded on Jewish values for the 21st century. So I had these 12 discussions and I survived. I learned some new things. The most important things I took away from this, believe it or not, was from the non-Jewish students whose groups I met. And it was really interesting because I gave 12 different readings and put them in an electronic box, and I asked students to do as many readings as they could. And in fact, when I asked them on the Zoom calls how many did the readings, all their hands went up in true Brandesian fashion. They're very hard workers here still. And when I asked them what was the most important reading that they did, it was unanimous in the groups. It was a 1953 article in Ebony magazine, the magazine for African Americans in the country. And it was an article about how Brandeis was the most democratic of universities and should be the model for all of American higher education. And it was a pretty extensive article about the history of the institution, why it was founded in 1948, about President Sacker and so forth. And the students' reaction to it was anger. It was frustration. It was, why don't we know about this? This is a point of pride. This is something we all should be taught. This is something we all should know coming in at orientation. Why haven't we learned about this? And I sort of stepped back and realized we don't talk about this all that much. We have students who aren't Jewish, who don't understand the Jewish tradition, who don't understand even the reason why Brandeis was founded. And it's no surprise to me now that they feel a bit marginalized at the university. They walk around and they find out they have off on Thursday on their syllabus because they have no idea why. And then they find out that it's something called Shemini Atzeret, and they have no idea what that means. And nobody else knows what it means that much. And I realized we do nothing to explain this to these students, and I think the takeaway here was that we have to do much better on orientation, onboarding faculty and staff and students as well. So in any case, I realize we're running out of time, so I probably should finish up here with two last points and say that coming out of these discussions has been this initiative that we're going to launch in the fall, an initiative on anti-Semitism, because what I realized was a lot of these discussions had questions about what was Brandeis's role in higher education when it comes to things like anti-Semitism. We're all doing great things on anti-racism, that we're all putting plans together both from the university level and also from a individual unit and school level, and we're trying to implement that as we go along. But what are we doing as Brandeis for anti-Semitism? And so I spoke to several nonprofits who are in this space and doing great work in the area of fighting anti-Semitism. And what I realized was many of them are not given much attention by other university leaders because they're not universities. And so who but Brandeis might be the main convener for talking about anti-Semitism, for educating university leaders so they have a better toolkit to deal with these issues on campus, which, by the way, is not an incidental issue. I mean, anti-Semitism on campuses is not something small. I feel blessed that I'm here at Brandeis because I don't have what many other institutions face. But in any case, in the fall, we will launch a program where we will be the conveners of university leaders, presidents, provost deans, to come here and to learn more about anti-Semitism and have things to go back to use on their campus. Finally, let me just say that March for Our Lives is, again, today happening as we are all assembled here. March for Our Lives is something that came out of the Parkland shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. And one of our students, or alums, Josh Moll from the class of 2019, helped to organize this at Brandeis in 2018. He is a Stoneman graduate, and his younger brother survived that shooting, who was present that day, and he was very much committed to this. And so that goes on today, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, given this university's commitment to social justice and repairing the world. So let me stop there and open it up to questions. Anything that I covered or didn't cover. And I guess we have mics going around the room, so just raise your hand and be happy to answer his questions the best I can.
I was just curious, what is the percent, when you said the consistency of the student population, what percentage are Jewish and non-Jewish, and what is the experience over the last 4 years on that percentage? Gone up or down or what? I'm just curious.
Well, we're not allowed to ask that question, and so we have to do this through... No. No, I can talk about it because I'm an academic. I can talk about anything. But no, we're not allowed to ask that question directly, but we have surrogate ways in which we can estimate it. And in fact, our own Cone Center for the Study of Jewish Life here on our campus, started doing studies back in 2015-16 on student life, and they found ways around asking directly, are you Jewish or not? And they did. And the interesting thing about the study, and I just have to say this, our board of trustees was so nervous back in 2015 that this report was going to go public that we had a special meeting of the board to talk about how we talk about it. And so we did, and we had a big phone call, and I realized what a big issue this was for a lot of alums. But in any case, in that study, just to give you a comparison, that study showed that the way that was asked, they were able to deduce that it was about 35 or 36% of the students were Jewish. Now, just to give you a comparison, Brandeis, or the only data that's published on this was published by Hillel International, and they always listed 50% every year, 50%, 50%. And so this 34 or 35 or 36% was a little bit of a shock to the trustees, but we really don't know exactly. 42% of the students in those surveys wrote none, but a lot of them had names like Liebowitz and Schwartz and Katz and so forth. And so that 35 or 36% might have been, 41, 42. We didn't really guesstimate that. But to give you an idea, the Cohen Center also did studies at Harvard, at Michigan. They want to do studies at 5 other schools. And the percentage of Jews in the same exact methodology, using the same survey and so forth, like for example at Harvard, showed 11%. And Harvard had always published 25, 26% Jews. So you can see that whatever it is, we're 3x of Harvard, I guess. That's good. So we don't know the exact percentage, but it's probably a third to 40%. That's what I would say. Long answer. Other questions? Yes, don't be shy.
My question is, what is the university doing to help still promote diversity of thought in addition to diversity of different I apologize.
President Liebowitz, thank you for your comments. My question is, what is the university, in these somewhat fraught times, and I realize Massachusetts is sort of a bubble of sorts, what is the university doing to help promote diversity of thought and diversity of ideas versus just diversity of, of demographic groups in identity politics?
That's a great question, and I think this is the greatest challenge that we have here at Brandeis, along with financial challenges that every institution of higher education except a few face. It's really difficult right now. We're a microcosm of larger society, and what's going on out there is going on in here. So there's a lot of divisiveness on the political side. But as I see it, and it's really problematic for universities to have the self-censorship that goes on, the fear of talking out. So there are individuals here, I am quite sure there are students that have an array of opinions on political issues, but what's gone on is that people have decided to self-censor. It was not worth engaging in discussion when the discussions usually turn into really nasty arguments and so forth. So what are we doing? I appointed in 2016, as brilliant as I was 2 weeks before the presidential elections, a task force on free expression. Probably bad timing, not knowing how the election was going to turn out. But in any case, we had this group of 18, which involves students, faculty, staff, and trustees, to talk about these issues, about the history of Brandeis, the commitment to open discussion, the Jewish traditions, whole approach to Havruta and arguing back and forth, not to disprove someone else, but to learn what you don't know. We talked all about that. And 18 months later, the Board of Trustees passed this document, which was as strong as the University of Chicago's document, which of course is the gold standard that everyone knows about. And it's really interesting in it because 4 individuals on the committee chose not to sign it because they believed that we needed to have some degree of controls and censorship and not allow certain things to be discussed because they were hurtful potentially to others. But the other 14 members of the committee stood strong and made this presentation to the administration and the board, and we adopted those principles. Now, since 2018, we didn't have any issues resulting from speech issues. But again, you don't know what is being self-censored and what is being avoided in terms of this engagement. But I will tell you, as I told you before this meeting today, that there is a movement among some faculty, I don't know who, but I expect to receive a proposal soon that will reopen the question of free expression. And we start putting controls on speech and academic freedom and redefine it. And my initial reaction has been to push back and to not do that. We haven't had bad situations on campus. Again, I want to stress that might not be because we're having this free engagement, but because people are self-censoring. But in any case, to start putting administrative limits on speech is a real problem. And even in discussions with our 3 teenagers, they're of a younger generation and they feel this is very appropriate, that your generation is crazy to have open speech, you can hurt people. And I ask them, who's the arbiter? Where do you draw the line? And tell me where you draw the line and why are you correct and I'm not correct? And so, to answer your question, we're doing all we can. Luckily, we haven't had many outward incidents. I'm very fearful, or I'm very concerned about the level of self-censorship and what is not being discussed, recognizing that this is sort of what's going on in the country at large.
We have a question from our online audience as well. This sounds like a plant, but I swear it's not. In addition to helping with fundraising and internships, how else can alumni best help the university?
Well, I think being ambassadors to university, I think that's what the role of alumni are. If they're predisposed to helping their alma mater, it's really to be ambassadors. It's to be recruiting students, talking about the university, providing, as I said before, internships, willingness to talk to students who are ready to graduate and have questions about professions about professional school, questions about professional schools and so forth, being available, hosting events, being willing to host faculty members to come. We have remarkable faculty here. I'm still amazed after 6 years to see the quality of this faculty and what they do and what they're willing to do for the university. And so hosting events, getting the word out and so forth. This is something I don't think we have really focused on. If I have to be 100% honest, one of the issues that I think we're working hard on, and Patsy Fisher and her crew have really begun to pick up the game, is to engage alumni as, our first line of supporters. And this is something somewhat new at the university. I think Brandeis is unique in many ways, and one of the ways it's been unique is to be different from a lot of others, but sometimes it's good to be like a lot of others who have great alumni support. And not just, I'm talking about financial, I'm talking about people who will talk up the university and be ambassadors. So in any way you can to promote Brandeis, it would be great. Financially is always good, but there are many other ways that you could help the university.
President Liebowitz, I'm in biomedical research, and in my field, the great barrier to progress is what's been called the replication crisis. A lot of things that are problematic in sciences that are not. My question to you is, can you share with me your perspectives on what it means, truth unto its innermost parts, and how you see it being carried forward in the best ways, inside of Brandeis and outside of Brandeis?
That's a great question, and I hate to resort to anecdotes, but I will because I think this is a great anecdote to answer that question. During the first 3 years before the pandemic that I was here, my wife and I hosted weekly lunches in the president's office, 12 to 14 individuals with us, just for us to get a sense of Brandeis and learn more about it right from the students, faculty, and staff that we invite to these lunches. And there were 2 or 3 questions we ask every single group. And one of it is what is unique about Brandeis in your view? That's the question we usually ask for faculty and for staff. And I'll never forget the response from this professor who's been here almost 30 years in the philosophy department. And she sort of was sitting at opposite ends of the table from me, and she said, well, my husband and I, he's on the faculty too in political science, she said, we've had 3 sabbaticals, and I think they were to Princeton, to Berkeley, and to Michigan. And she said, I'll tell you the difference. I'll tell you what's unique about Brandeis. She said, to this day, she said, when we taught at those schools and we come back, the biggest difference is that in our classrooms, Brandeis students still come here to learn. She said, I got to tell you, the difference is night and day, even at those excellent, exceptional schools. The students here come to learn, which brings me to a point that the academic rigor of this place, the pursuit of truth, even unto its innermost part, is not only with the faculty. Forget about the faculty for a minute. It comes from the students who are still here to find the truth and to pursue academic knowledge and knowledge on its own right. And then she leaned across the table, literally half across the table, pointing at me, and she said, and don't you dare change this. This is something that I think is embedded deeply in the university, and it's what my wife and I have found to be very different about Brandeis from other institutions. And so I would say that so long as we continue to attract the students that we've attracted, and we have the faculty pass down the culture that really came from Abe Sacker and the original faculty that was here, that was responsible for creating a very different type of academic culture than you see at other places. And I can get into the reasons for that, although we run out of overtime. There's a real reason. I have a whole explanation for why we are unique in this way, and it has to do with how Abe Sacker hired his first set of faculty members for the first 10 years, which carried out a culture and a tradition here. So I think we're pretty good in this area. I'm not worried about that.